It's really important to be intentional, sensitive, and sequential in goal planning when working with women who have lived through domestic abuse. For week 1, our goals are to build safety and trust, to develop women's understanding of what abuse encompasses, and to establish a community of women. For week 2, our goals are to give voice to how various behaviors and actions of abuse have affected them, as well as to learn about the power and control wheel in order to understand the dynamics taking place in the relationship between the abuser and the abused person.
The silhouette activity is conducted almost in the first and second sessions. Basically, we draw a silhouette of a women on a life-size craft paper. The activity is basically 2 parts. One part is you're writing all the abuse that you might have experienced and you place them outside the silhouette. The next session, you're writing all the impacts that you experienced due to facing those abuses, and you stick it inside the silhouette. It is one of the activities where it breaks silence. So participants, they realize that a lot of them have gone through the same abuse, which has led to the same impact, creating like a shared experience where they're able to break isolation, connect, and find support in the group.
For week 3, our goals are to understand the cycle of violence and how it contributes to women staying in abusive relationships, as well as to explore how violence can be intergenerational and those effects on child witnesses of abuse. For week 4, our goal is to become more self-aware by understanding about intuition and emotions and how to value and tune into them for our own safety and well-being. For week 5, the goals are to explore the importance of boundaries in our relationships, and yet how abusers repeatedly break those boundaries, and thus to acknowledge the safety mechanisms that abused women resort to. As well, we want to provide tools to stand up against women's discourse about women's responsibility for abuse, and thus to acknowledge one's courage and stamina in the face of incredible messaging and adversity. And lastly, in week 5, to remove the stigma of shame from women who shoulder blame for the abuse that has happened against them. In week 6, our goals are to learn about trauma and about how experiencing a traumatic event or a recurring trauma, as in abusive relationships, can impact an abused person's life. Also for them to learn how to recognize their own window of tolerance when trauma has occurred, and to identify and start putting into practice self-care. And then for week 7, our goals are to understand the huge differences between the abuse belief system versus the relationship belief system, and to mitigate shame and self-blame that so many of our women are feeling, and to put context to why reframing dominant discourses is vital to our mental health. We also hope in week 7 to understand about vulnerability, shame, fear, self-blame, and isolation, and then to promote safety awareness, regardless of context, relationship, or geographic location. In week 8, our goals are to understand the signs of a codependent relationship and frame such within the context of abuse. And then to move on from that, for the women to know the signs of a trustworthy relationship in order to evaluate the relationships that we're all in. And lastly, in week 8, to acknowledge the necessity and value of building up our personal support systems and how to access and build them up. In week 9, we do a really interesting activity that they can carry forward and continue on at home. And that is to create a personal vision board that brings them hope and the pursuit of fulfilling personal goals. So a lot of them have stopped dreaming. We want them to dream again and realize that there really is a good, great future out there for them. So for week 10, our goals are for our ladies to listen to and ask guest speakers about communities, resources, and services in order for them to be able to tap into them. For example, we have child therapists with another partner organization. And so one of our women has tapped into these for her 2 children, because when you have child witnesses, there's a lot of trauma and they don't have the language to be able to articulate that. So it's been a fantastic resource. And also through a very powerful reenactment.
blanket of blame enactment is like a skit where a woman is trying to reach out for help, and everywhere she's going, to her friends, family, neighbors, work, she is being blamed for the abuse she has faced. So in the enactment, what happens is whenever she is blamed, like a layer of blanket is put on the women, so much so that there is darkness, it's hard to breathe. And then on the other side of it, there are words of encouragement or people being there for you. And then one after another, you remove the blanket, and that's how the blanket of blame enactment is conducted. These are real things women face, and they internalize the blame. They think they are to be blamed for what has happened, and it is just to demonstrate that they're not to be blamed for the abuse that they experienced, and the shame is not for them to carry.
For week 11, the goals are to understand the process and normality of grieving, loss, and rebuilding their lives, as well as to give grace to themselves in the healing journey by understanding myths in leaving and too often harmful messages that victims may be exposed to about getting over the relationship or moving on from the relationship. And in so doing, we want to be able to have them know what tools they can tap into to practice self-care and self-compassion. And week 12, we want to give opportunity to hear from the Winnipeg Police Service. We have a guest speaker who comes in, and our women get to ask them questions. We also want to give opportunity for evaluation of the MIRRORS program, because this is the final program, week 12. And then again in week 12, to be able to recognize through an empowerment ceremony the courage and growth of each woman participant for attending, participating, and reclaiming themselves, their identity, values, dreams, and hopes, as well as beginning to find their place within the community. And so in so doing, we revisit the stone and candle ceremony that refreshes everyone's belief in their values and strengths. And finally, the last goal for week 12 is to enjoy a community of victim-turned survivors, overcomers, thrivers throughout the 3 months course that we've been together.